On a routine flight, a respected doctor is slapped by a flight attendant for no apparent reason. But here's the twist. Just 2 minutes later, she's fired on the spot. What triggered this shocking outburst? And why did everything change in such a short amount of time? You won't believe how this all unfolded. Before we start the story, comment below and let us know where in the world you're watching from today. And if you enjoy this story, don't forget to hit subscribe for more. Aboard a routine flight from Atlanta to Chicago, tensions were building, but no one could have predicted how things would unfold. The cabin was filled with the usual mix of passengers. Some were sleeping, others scrolling through their phones, and a few chatted quietly. Dr. Samuel Thompson, a well-respected doctor, had just wrapped up a long day at the hospital and was hoping for a peaceful flight home. He had been looking forward to some rest, as he had an early shift the next morning. After boarding the plane, he took his seat, stored his carry-on bag in the overhead compartment, and settled in. But it wasn't long before things started to feel off. A flight attendant named Sarah, in her late 20s, walked down the aisle with a stern look on her face. Dr. Thompson had barely finished adjusting his seat when he noticed Sarah stopping near him. She asked him to move his bag, as it was slightly blocking the aisle. Dr. Thompson, who had always been polite and professional, nodded and quickly complied. He didn't think much of it. It was just a small inconvenience. After he moved the bag, he sat back down and let out a sigh, relieved that he could finally relax. As the plane began taxiing toward the runway, something seemed to shift in the air. Sarah had returned to check the cabin, and there was a noticeable tension between her and Dr. Thompson. He wasn't sure what had caused it, but he sensed a growing frustration coming from her. As she walked past, he casually remarked, "Long day at work," expecting to strike up a friendly conversation. He had no idea that this small comment would spark something much larger. Sarah's expression changed. Her eyes narrowed, and without saying a word, she turned back to face him. It was subtle, but her posture stiffened as she leaned in closer, her voice lowering just enough for only Dr. Thompson to hear. "This isn't the time for small talk," she snapped, her tone sharp and cold. Dr. Thompson, surprised by the sudden shift in attitude, blinked in confusion. He wasn't sure if she was just having a bad day or if something else was bothering her, but he quickly apologized, thinking that would be the end of it. He had no idea that this awkward exchange would escalate into something far more shocking. What Dr. Thompson didn't realize was that Sarah's temper had been building all day. She had already dealt with a stressful shift and wasn't in the mood for the usual customer service routine. Her frustration, combined with the tight space and crowded cabin, was now boiling over. And when Dr. Thompson spoke to her, trying to make light of the situation, it was the spark that set everything off. The tension in the air grew thicker and Dr. Thompson could feel it. He leaned back in his seat, trying to shake off the awkwardness. He had no intention of upsetting anyone. He simply wanted to get through the flight as peacefully as possible. But things took an unexpected turn when Sarah suddenly stopped in the middle of the aisle, glaring at him with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. "Is there a problem, ma'am?" Dr. Thompson asked, trying to break the silence with a calm voice, hoping to diffuse the situation. But Sarah didn't respond to him directly. Instead, she stood there, her hands on her hips, her eyes fixed on him. For a brief moment, there was an eerie quiet. Then, without warning, Sarah snapped, "I told you to keep it down." Her voice rose, startling not just Dr. Thompson, but several passengers nearby who looked up in confusion. Dr. Thompson, now genuinely confused, attempted to explain himself. "I was just saying I've had a long day," he began, his voice steady but calm. "I didn't mean to upset you." But before he could say another word, something shocking happened. Without any further warning, Sarah moved toward him, her eyes cold and unfazed. The next thing Dr. Thompson knew, a sharp slap landed across his face. The sound of it echoed through the cabin, and the entire plane fell into stunned silence. Passengers turned in their seats, eyes wide with disbelief. The air in the cabin seemed to freeze for a second as Dr. Thompson sat there, in complete shock, his face still stinging from the unexpected hit. He didn't know how to react. He looked around the cabin, hoping someone would step in, but it was as if everyone was too stunned to move. Sarah stood over him for a moment, still fuming. Her face showed no regret, just anger. And in that moment, it felt like everything changed. The flight, once just another routine journey, had now become a scene of chaos. No one could believe what they had just witnessed. Dr. Thompson, normally a composed man, sat frozen, unsure of how to process what had just happened. The minutes that followed were tense. Dr. Thompson slowly stood up, his voice calm but firm. "I need to speak with the captain," he said, his eyes never leaving Sarah. He wasn't sure what would happen next, but he knew something needed to be done. No one had ever treated him like this before, especially not in a public setting. This wasn't just an isolated incident, it was an outright attack. And the worst part was, Sarah didn't even seem to care. A few passengers, their phones now in hand, began recording the scene, while others murmured among themselves, exchanging looks of disbelief. Sarah, still standing there, didn't seem to acknowledge the growing crowd of eyes on her. She was too consumed by whatever anger had led to this moment. As Dr. Thompson stood, still processing what had just happened, the cabin around him seemed to hold its breath. A few passengers murmured, unsure of what to do, but Dr. Thompson didn't waste any time. His voice was steady as he turned toward one of the flight attendants standing nearby. "I need to speak to the captain," he said firmly. There was no mistaking the seriousness in his tone. The other passengers, sensing the gravity of the situation, began whispering among themselves. Some stared at Dr. Thompson in disbelief, while others shot worried glances at Sarah, who was still standing at the front of the aisle, her arms crossed defensively. She looked almost unbothered, as if her actions had been justified. It didn't take long for the tension to boil over. One of the senior flight attendants, who had been in the galley preparing drinks, rushed to the scene after hearing the commotion. She immediately assessed the situation. "What happened here?" she asked, her voice filled with concern. Dr. Thompson calmly explained, though his voice still had an edge to it. "This flight attendant just slapped me. I need to speak with the captain immediately." The senior flight attendant, her face going pale, quickly turned to Sarah. "Sarah, what's going on?" But Sarah, her jaw set in anger, remained silent, refusing to explain her actions. Within moments, the situation escalated. The captain was contacted, and a decision was made. A few minutes later, 2 airport security personnel boarded the plane. The entire cabin watched in silence as the security officers made their way down the aisle. They didn't even hesitate as they reached Sarah. One of the officers calmly spoke. "Ma'am, we need you to come with us." Sarah's eyes flickered with disbelief, but she didn't resist. She stood up slowly, as if trying to regain some sense of control over the situation. The passengers, who had been watching in stunned silence, exchanged nervous glances. No one had expected things to unfold like this. Dr. Thompson, still trying to process the slap, remained in his seat, his expression a mix of anger and confusion. He had expected maybe a complaint or a warning, but not this. He never imagined that the flight attendant would be escorted off the plane just minutes after the slap. As Sarah walked down the aisle, head held high, her face was a mask of frustration. But it was clear that she had no idea how this one impulsive act had spiraled out of control. No one said a word to her as she passed, though the tension in the cabin was palpable. Some passengers stared at her with pity, while others glared with anger. Dr. Thompson sat in his seat, shaking his head. He couldn't believe what had just happened. The slap still burned on his cheek, but it was the surreal speed of the entire situation that was really hitting him. In a matter of minutes, his simple flight had turned into a spectacle that no one would forget. And Sarah, she was about to face consequences far bigger than she ever expected. The plane landed in Chicago shortly after the incident, but the tension that had filled the cabin didn't dissipate. The passengers were still buzzing, many of them shaking their heads, trying to process what they had just witnessed. But for Dr. Thompson, his thoughts were focused on what would happen next. He had already filed a formal complaint with the senior flight attendant, but little did he know that the consequences of Sarah's actions would be swift and severe. As soon as the plane arrived at the gate, Dr. Thompson was escorted off the plane by airline staff, but not before a quick conversation with airport security. He was calm, explaining everything that had happened without raising his voice. The airline's security team made sure that Dr. Thompson was safe, and the airline promised to investigate the incident thoroughly. Back on the ground, things moved quickly. The airline's HR team, already notified of the situation, wasted no time launching a full investigation into the altercation. Witness statements from passengers and other crew members were gathered, and the video footage, taken by a few alert passengers, was analyzed. It didn't take long for the airline to make its decision. A spokesperson for the airline, when contacted by the media, gave a clear and concise statement. "We take all matters of professional conduct very seriously. The actions of this flight attendant, especially toward a medical professional, are completely unacceptable. We believe in maintaining a safe and respectful environment for all our passengers, and this incident violates our standards." By the time Sarah was officially removed from the flight, the airline had already made the decision to terminate her employment. She was called into a meeting with her supervisor, where she was informed of her immediate dismissal. Sarah was shocked. She had expected some kind of disciplinary action, maybe a warning or a suspension, but not this. She was handed a letter of termination on the spot. For Sarah, the realization of what had just happened hit her like a ton of bricks. She had lost her job. Her career in aviation, built over years of hard work, was over in the blink of an eye. It wasn't just about the slap anymore. It was about the broader implications of her actions. What she didn't understand at the time was that her moment of anger had tarnished her reputation, and in such a high-profile incident there was no going back. Meanwhile, Dr. Thompson was praised for his calm demeanor in the face of the confrontation. He spoke to reporters, expressing that he never wanted things to escalate the way they did. He was, however, adamant that the airline needed to take swift action against any employee who behaved inappropriately, especially in a professional setting. He emphasized that as a medical professional, he had a duty to remain composed, but that didn't mean he should tolerate abuse no matter where it came from. The entire situation had unfolded in a matter of minutes, but it left lasting effects. The airline made a public apology to Dr. Thompson, assuring him and other passengers that they would continue to ensure a safe and respectful experience for everyone on board. Sarah, on the other hand, would have to face the consequences of her rash decision, a decision that would follow her for years to come. As news of the incident spread, it didn't take long for the story to go viral. The video footage, captured by several passengers, was shared across social media, sparking outrage. People everywhere were shocked by the footage of the flight attendant slapping a doctor, and many took to Twitter, Facebook, and other platforms to express their disbelief and anger. The hashtag number #FlightAttendantSlap trended for days, and the story was picked up by major news outlets. For Dr. Thompson, the attention was overwhelming. He had never imagined his routine flight would turn into a media spectacle. While he appreciated the support from the public, he felt uneasy about the attention. The spotlight was on him for all the right reasons, but it was hard to ignore the constant barrage of messages and calls. Some praised him for staying calm in the face of such provocation, while others simply wished him well, expressing their disbelief that he had been treated that way. On the other hand, Sarah's life was quickly spiraling out of control. Once her firing made headlines, the backlash was swift and harsh. People on social media were unforgiving. Many criticized her for being unprofessional, and some went as far as to question her emotional stability. Online forums were filled with comments calling for stricter accountability for flight attendants and other service professionals who interacted with the public. "She has no business working with the public if she can't control her temper," one user wrote. Another comment read, "I would never fly with that airline again after seeing this." Despite the growing criticism, there were also some who took to social media in defense of Sarah, although their numbers were much smaller. A few tried to argue that there must have been something more to the story, that perhaps Dr. Thompson had provoked her in some way. However, the overwhelming majority of comments sided with the doctor, with people voicing their outrage over how quickly things had escalated. The video showing Sarah slapping Dr. Thompson without warning left little room for doubt. Sarah, who had once been proud of her role as a flight attendant, began to feel the weight of her actions. She tried to explain herself in interviews, but each attempt only seemed to make things worse. Her statements were scattered and defensive, and many felt she was not taking full responsibility for what she had done. In one particularly memorable interview, Sarah said, "I just snapped. It was a bad day, and I let it get the better of me." That only seemed to make the situation worse, as people felt her response lacked any genuine remorse. The airline, already under intense scrutiny, released another statement after the public backlash intensified. "We understand the concerns of our passengers and the public. We are committed to maintaining the highest standards of service and professionalism. We are reviewing all of our training and procedures to ensure something like this never happens again." But despite the company's efforts to smooth things over, the damage had already been done. The airline was now associated with the incident, and many people, especially those who had seen the footage, began to question how such behavior could be allowed in the first place. As the days passed, Sarah's social media accounts were flooded with angry messages. The support she had once received from colleagues and friends started to dwindle, and she found herself isolated. Her name was now synonymous with the incident, and she struggled to regain any sense of normalcy. She had not only lost her job, but the public fallout made it nearly impossible for her to continue her career in aviation. The damage to her reputation was extensive, and it seemed unlikely that she would find work in the industry again anytime soon. For Dr. Thompson, the aftermath of the slap was more complicated than he had anticipated. While he was grateful that the airline had taken swift action, he couldn't shake the feeling of discomfort every time he saw the viral videos or read the comments. He had simply wanted to go home and recover from his long day, not become a part of a viral story. But as the attention on the incident grew, he realized that it wasn't just about the slap anymore. It was about a larger conversation on respect, professionalism, and how we handle conflict in public spaces. He began to speak more openly about the importance of maintaining composure, even in difficult situations, but also emphasized that no one should tolerate mistreatment, no matter the circumstances. As the public's attention began to shift to other stories, the incident slowly faded from the headlines. But for Sarah and Dr. Thompson, the effects of that brief moment would stay with them for much longer. For Sarah, the slap was more than just a loss of a job. It was the end of a career. And for Dr. Thompson, it was a reminder of how quickly a routine moment can spiral out of control. While the public outcry continued to stir, the story didn't end with the flight attendant's dismissal. Dr. Thompson, while trying to move on from the experience, was left with more to deal with than just the shock of the slap. As the investigation into the incident unfolded, it became clear that there would be legal consequences for Sarah's actions. Dr. Thompson, although calm and composed in his interviews, had started to feel the weight of what had happened. The slap wasn't just an emotional bruise, it left a mark on his professional life as well. He had always been a calm, composed figure, especially in the high-pressure environment of a hospital. But the fact that something like this could happen so suddenly, and in such a public setting, made him question the safety and professionalism of the places he frequented. After speaking with his lawyer, Dr. Thompson decided to pursue a formal legal case against Sarah. He wasn't looking for revenge, but he believed that there needed to be consequences for such unprovoked behavior. The legal team suggested a civil suit for battery, pointing out that Sarah's slap was an assault, regardless of the context. Dr. Thompson wasn't the type to seek attention or profit from such an incident, but he felt strongly that what had happened to him needed to be addressed in the court of law. Meanwhile, Sarah, who had hoped that the media frenzy would die down, found herself under increasing legal pressure. The airline, although not directly involved in the altercation, had its own legal team working to protect its interests. They were cooperating with the investigation, but it was clear that they were looking to distance themselves from the incident. The company had already terminated Sarah's employment, but now they were also considering whether she might be liable for damages due to the emotional distress caused to Dr. Thompson. As the case moved forward, the media shifted its focus to the legal aspects of the situation. News outlets that had once been focused on the dramatic incident now shifted to the potential lawsuit. Legal experts weighed in, explaining the seriousness of the charges Sarah could face. Many pointed out that, while the slap might have been impulsive, it was still a physical assault that carried legal consequences. In addition to the battery charge, there were discussions about potential defamation if Sarah's public comments about Dr. Thompson were found to be damaging to his reputation. Sarah, who had already been through the ringer emotionally, now had to face the reality of her actions in a courtroom. She had hoped to move on from the incident, but now her future was uncertain. Her legal defense focused on the argument that the slap was a result of stress and frustration, a momentary lapse in judgment. Her attorney tried to argue that she had no intent to harm Dr. Thompson, and that the incident had been blown out of proportion. But despite these attempts to minimize the situation, the evidence was against her. The video footage, the witness statements, and Dr. Thompson's testimony all painted a clear picture. As the legal proceedings dragged on, Sarah found herself struggling to rebuild her life. With a potential lawsuit looming over her head and her career in tatters, she was forced to confront the reality of what she had done. The support she had once enjoyed among friends and colleagues evaporated, and the social media backlash continued to haunt her. Even as she tried to move on, the shadow of the slap and its legal consequences followed her wherever she went. For Dr. Thompson, the legal route wasn't about the money or the attention. It was about accountability. He had always believed in the power of professionalism and the importance of maintaining respect, even in the most difficult situations. He had been in countless high-stress environments during his medical career, and never once had he allowed his emotions to get the better of him. He wanted Sarah's case to serve as a reminder to everyone, regardless of their profession, that actions have consequences, especially when they affect others in such a personal way. As the case approached its trial date, both parties prepared for the long road ahead. For Dr. Thompson, the legal process was just another chapter in this strange and unsettling story. For Sarah, it was the harsh reality of how one reckless moment could change the course of her entire life. The court would ultimately decide her fate. But no matter the outcome, one thing was certain: the slap would follow her for years to come. In the weeks following the incident, the airline, which had initially moved quickly to dismiss Sarah and address the issue publicly, found itself facing even more scrutiny. The backlash from both passengers and the media had put them under a microscope, and many began questioning their procedures when it came to handling conflicts between crew members and passengers. Some criticized the airline for not having a stronger protocol for preventing such incidents, while others felt the company had been too hasty in firing Sarah without fully understanding the context. The public's reaction to the airline's response was mixed. On one hand, many praised the company for taking swift action against Sarah, with some pointing out that they had set a good example by holding their employees accountable. "The airline did the right thing," one passenger tweeted. "No one should be treated like that, especially not a doctor." But there was also a growing chorus of critics who believed the airline had acted too quickly and without proper investigation into the root cause of the altercation. How could they fire her without understanding the full picture? "There's always two sides to a story," another social media user argued. In an attempt to calm the storm, the airline's CEO, John Matthews, appeared in an exclusive interview where he addressed the situation head-on. "We understand the gravity of this incident and the public concern," Matthews said, his tone firm yet apologetic. "We acted swiftly to address the actions of one of our employees, but we also recognize that this was an isolated situation and does not reflect the overall values of our company. We are committed to ensuring that all of our employees are trained to handle conflicts in a professional and respectful manner." But even as Matthews tried to shift the narrative, questions began to surface about the company's training programs for flight attendants. Were employees properly equipped to handle high-stress situations? Could the airline have prevented the altercation by providing more comprehensive conflict resolution training? These questions gained traction, and soon, there were calls for reforms in the airline's internal policies. Passengers, meanwhile, expressed mixed feelings about flying with the airline again. Some said they would never book another flight with them, citing the incident as proof that the airline didn't have control over its staff. Others, however, believed that the company had done the right thing by terminating Sarah, and they were willing to give the airline another chance. Still, a general sense of distrust lingered, and the airline's reputation had certainly taken a hit. Behind the scenes, the airline worked to make amends. A new, more detailed customer service training program was rolled out, focusing specifically on de-escalation techniques and emotional intelligence. Flight attendants and other staff were required to attend mandatory workshops on handling difficult interactions with passengers. The company also announced plans to introduce a new code of conduct for employees, with clear guidelines on how to manage conflict without resorting to physical aggression. The fallout wasn't just limited to Sarah's firing or the airline's reputation. The airline faced legal pressure as well. Lawyers representing Dr. Thompson filed a lawsuit against both Sarah and the airline, arguing that they were partially responsible for the incident by not properly training their staff to handle difficult situations. The legal team contended that the airline's failure to intervene or provide proper oversight contributed to the altercation, and that they had a responsibility to ensure the safety of all passengers. The airline's legal team responded by maintaining that they had followed standard procedures in handling the situation, but they also hinted at the possibility of a settlement with Dr. Thompson to avoid a lengthy trial. The airline, eager to put the whole matter behind them, was willing to make financial amends in exchange for a resolution. Still, many within the company were anxious about the long-term effects of the incident on their business. Even though they had taken the necessary actions, there was a lingering concern about how this scandal would affect their brand image going forward. For Sarah, the aftermath was painful. Her reputation, once built on years of service, was now irrevocably tarnished. She had hoped that after the incident, things would settle down and she could find a way to rebuild her career. But the public outcry was relentless, and many in the aviation industry were reluctant to hire someone with such a high-profile scandal attached to their name. She faced a struggle to even get a job interview, let alone be offered a position. Despite her attempts to apologize and explain herself, the damage was done. Her future in the industry looked bleak. It wasn't just her career that was in jeopardy. Sarah found herself grappling with personal issues as well. The social media backlash continued, and many people in her personal life distanced themselves from her. Her social media accounts, once filled with travel pictures and updates from her flights, became flooded with angry messages from strangers. She had become the subject of memes, jokes, and ridicule. Some of her former colleagues reached out privately, expressing their support, but it was clear that she had become a pariah in the industry. Meanwhile, Dr. Thompson had returned to his medical practice, but the incident weighed heavily on him. Though he didn't seek out attention, the constant media inquiries and the barrage of public opinion had left him feeling unsettled. Despite the recognition for his composed response during the altercation, he couldn't escape the feeling that his life had been upended by a single, unprovoked incident. He had been just another doctor trying to get home, but now his name was forever linked to the viral video of the flight attendant's slap. As the weeks passed, both Sarah and Dr. Thompson began to realize that their lives had been changed in ways neither had expected. The incident, though brief, had set off a chain of events that neither could have foreseen. The airline, too, would bear the scars of the incident for a long time, with the impact on their reputation likely to echo for years to come. No one came out unscathed, and the lessons learned from the entire ordeal were painful reminders of how quickly things could spiral out of control. As the dust settled, the aftermath of the incident began to take shape in more subtle ways. For Dr. Thompson, the shock of being slapped in front of a plane full of people slowly morphed into a series of reflections. While the public focus on the incident had started to wane, the emotional toll was still there. He found himself replaying the events over and over in his mind. Why had it escalated so quickly? Could he have done something differently to avoid the confrontation? But in the end, Dr. Thompson knew that he had handled the situation the best he could under the circumstances. His professionalism and composure had helped him navigate the storm, but it didn't make the experience any less unsettling. Dr. Thompson spoke less about the incident in public, but behind closed doors, he found himself questioning the standards of customer service and behavior in high-stress environments. As a doctor, he had always been trained to remain calm in emergencies, to put the needs of others before his own, and to deal with stress with a clear mind. Yet, this altercation aboard a flight had shown him that even professionals could lose their tempers under pressure. And sometimes, it wasn't just about the individual's actions, but the broader culture of how conflicts were handled. He spoke to some colleagues about the incident, and many of them expressed sympathy, with some even telling him that they were surprised something like this hadn't happened sooner. "You're in a high-stress environment all the time," one of his fellow doctors said. "People are tired, they're irritable, and sometimes things snap. I'm just glad it didn't escalate further." Dr. Thompson couldn't help but agree. The entire situation had felt surreal, like a nightmare he couldn't wake up from. On the other side of the story, Sarah's life had taken a very different turn. The emotional toll of losing her job, her reputation, and her sense of security began to wear heavily on her. After months of trying to explain herself and seeking redemption, she was left with an overwhelming sense of regret. The supportive messages she had once received from coworkers and friends had dwindled, replaced by a constant stream of negativity. She had hoped that with time, the public would forget about the slap, but it wasn't that easy. The internet doesn't forget. Social media still reminded her of the moment every day, whether it was through a viral post, a meme, or a comment on a video that had surfaced online. Sarah was forced to reflect on her own behavior. At first, she had tried to justify her actions. It was a bad day, she'd say to herself. Everyone has moments of frustration. But as the months wore on and the support dwindled, she began to see how deep her mistake had been. She had let her emotions get the best of her, and the consequences had been severe. The slap had been an impulsive reaction, something she wished she could take back. But as much as she wanted to undo it, she knew that the damage had been done. Her attempts to restart her career in aviation proved futile. No airline was willing to hire someone with her reputation. Even though she had years of experience as a flight attendant, her name was now synonymous with the incident. No matter how much she tried to explain that it was a momentary lapse in judgment, no one seemed willing to give her a second chance. She had been labeled unprofessional, and that label was hard to shake off. In a way, the incident had become her new identity, one that she couldn't escape. One evening, Sarah sat alone in her apartment, scrolling through old photos of her time as a flight attendant. She had loved her job, traveling the world, meeting new people, and being part of a team that helped make people's journeys easier. It had been a career she was proud of, but it felt like a lifetime ago now. The slap had stolen that from her. She had hoped that time would heal the wound, but it seemed as if every passing day only deepened the scar. In the quiet of her room, Sarah reflected on the wider lessons she had learned from the incident. It wasn't just about managing anger or stress. It was about understanding the weight of every action, especially in a public setting. A single moment of rage had turned her life upside down, and what had once felt like a small, inconsequential conflict had transformed into a defining moment that she would carry with her forever. Dr. Thompson, meanwhile, found solace in his work. The support he had received from colleagues and the public had helped him regain a sense of normalcy. But there was still a part of him that couldn't forget that moment on the plane. That slap had shaken him, not just physically but emotionally. It had reminded him that even in the most professional environments, things could spiral out of control in an instant. Yet, despite the challenge, he had kept his head and refused to let the incident define him. As both Sarah and Dr. Thompson navigated their new realities, it became clear that the story was far from over for either of them. The flight attendant's slap had triggered a chain of events that neither of them could have predicted, and both would continue to wrestle with the consequences for years to come. For Sarah, the journey ahead was uncertain, filled with attempts at redemption and the slow process of rebuilding her life. For Dr. Thompson, the incident would serve as a reminder of the power of professionalism and how, in a moment's time, everything can change. But one thing was certain. Both of them had learned the hard way that actions, especially in moments of frustration, can have a ripple effect far beyond what anyone can imagine. As time went on, the ripple effects of the incident reached further than anyone could have imagined. For Dr. Thompson, the initial shock of being slapped on the plane had worn off, but the emotional toll lingered. He had handled the immediate fallout with grace, but behind closed doors, the experience weighed on him. He began to realize that what had happened wasn't just a random event. It was a reflection of larger societal issues, stress, emotional health, and how we often fail to address the pressure that service workers face every day. Dr. Thompson began speaking out more openly about the emotional strain that comes with demanding professions, both for healthcare workers and those in the service industry. He used his experience to advocate for better mental health resources and stress management training for employees who deal with the public daily. He spoke with fellow doctors and medical professionals, telling them how important it was to address emotional well-being before it reached a breaking point. He used his platform to share his story, but more importantly to call attention to the need for a broader conversation about empathy, emotional intelligence, and how to deal with frustration in the workplace. Everyone has bad days, but it's how we respond to them that defines us, he said in one of his interviews. That's something we need to teach everyone, not just medical professionals or flight attendants, but people in all kinds of roles, especially those in customer service. He realized that by sharing his story, he could help normalize conversations about the pressure people face in their everyday lives, and perhaps prevent something like this from happening again. But even as he became an advocate for these causes, there was a part of him that still couldn't forget the physical sting of the slap. The emotional scars from that day stayed with him. He found himself more cautious in his interactions with strangers, more attuned to people's moods and temperaments. He began to read people's body language more closely, anticipating conflict before it had the chance to escalate. He couldn't help but think about Sarah, what she had been going through that day, what had led her to snap in that moment. Dr. Thompson had no way of knowing what stress or frustration she had been carrying, but the incident had shown him that even those who seem to have control over their emotions can be pushed to a breaking point. In his personal life, Dr. Thompson's relationship with his wife, Vanessa, became even stronger after the incident. She had been his rock throughout the whole ordeal, offering support as the media spotlight focused on him. They often spoke late into the night, reflecting on how quickly things could spiral out of control. "It just goes to show how little it takes for someone's life to change in an instant," Vanessa would say. "You're just trying to get home from work, and then, boom, everything changes." For Dr. Thompson, her words struck a chord. They served as a reminder that life was fragile, and that for all his composure and professional success, he was still human. On the other side, Sarah's struggle continued, but in a very different way. The road to redemption was long, and the more she tried to move on, the more it felt like the past was constantly catching up to her. The negative comments on social media never stopped. The viral videos of the slap were everywhere, and every time she logged into her social media accounts, she was met with harsh reminders of her mistake. Some were outright cruel, while others were more subtle but just as cutting. "I can't believe she did that," one comment read. "She doesn't deserve to work in customer service ever again." Another one said, "I hope she's learned her lesson. That's just disgraceful behavior." Despite the overwhelming negativity, Sarah tried to push through. She made an attempt to explain herself, writing lengthy posts on her social media pages, expressing regret and acknowledging the impact of her actions. She apologized repeatedly, but the apologies seemed to fall on deaf ears. "I've made a huge mistake," she wrote in one post, "and I will never forgive myself for the pain I caused. Please know that I'm deeply sorry to Dr. Thompson and anyone else who witnessed this." But the more she apologized, the more it seemed like the public wanted her to suffer. Her reputation, once built on years of service and hard work, had been shattered in an instant. Every job application she sent out was met with silence. She contacted several airlines, hoping for a chance to explain the situation and show that she had learned from her mistake, but no one would give her a second look. The stigma was too strong. The emotional toll of this public shaming began to affect her mental health. Sarah spent long hours alone in her apartment, reflecting on what had happened. She replayed the events in her mind again and again, trying to understand why she had let her emotions take over in that moment. She had never been the type to lash out. In fact, many of her former colleagues would describe her as calm and collected under pressure. So, what had triggered her outburst? Sarah realized that she had been carrying a lot of personal stress that had built up over time. She had been struggling with family issues, financial problems, and the pressure of her job. She had never been the type to ask for help or show vulnerability. It was easier to bottle everything up, to push through, to pretend everything was fine. But that day, it all came crashing down. In her mind, she knew that she had been under a lot of pressure, but she also knew that none of that justified her actions. She had allowed herself to snap, and in doing so, she had destroyed her career and her self-respect. Sarah's self-reflection began to shift into something more proactive. She started looking for ways to rebuild her life, though it was a struggle. She decided to enroll in counseling, seeking help for the emotional toll of her actions and the public fallout. It wasn't an easy decision, but it was one she knew she had to make if she ever hoped to move forward. She began to work on herself, learning about emotional regulation, managing stress, and how to build healthier coping mechanisms. While she struggled with the scars of her past actions, Sarah also found that personal growth came in small, difficult steps. She knew that she would never be able to undo what she had done, but she also recognized that she could learn from it and do better in the future. Whether or not the world would ever forgive her was another matter entirely, but she knew that forgiveness had to start with herself. For both Sarah and Dr. Thompson, the journey was one of personal transformation. The incident on that plane had changed the trajectory of their lives in ways they could never have imagined. But over time, they both began to understand the deeper lessons that emerged from their painful experiences. Dr. Thompson, while never forgetting the slap, used the event as a reminder of the importance of empathy and the need to look beyond a person's actions to understand what may have caused them. Sarah, on the other hand, learned the hard way that emotions, when not properly managed, could lead to destructive consequences. Both of them, in their own ways, came to realize that growth comes not from avoiding mistakes, but from facing them head-on and using them as stepping stones toward a better future. Though their paths had been marked by public humiliation and deep personal struggle, the incident eventually faded from the headlines. But for Sarah and Dr. Thompson, it would remain a turning point in their lives, one that reminded them both of the fragility of human behavior and the profound impact that one moment of impulse can have on the course of a life. Months passed, and life slowly returned to a sense of normalcy. But both Dr. Thompson and Sarah found that the scars left by the incident lingered far longer than they had anticipated. For Dr. Thompson, although the media frenzy had subsided, he was still often asked about the altercation in interviews or casual conversations. While he no longer felt the sting of the slap itself, he realized that the emotional impact of the incident was far from over. Every time he spoke about it, he was reminded of the tension that had clouded what should have been a simple, uneventful flight. He found himself contemplating the deeper implications of his public experience. His job had always required him to be calm under pressure, whether in the emergency room or at the bedside of a distressed patient. But the flight attendant's slap had taught him that sometimes, even professionals like himself could be caught off guard. he had come to appreciate the value of emotional resilience more deeply. Dr. Thompson became more involved in speaking about mental health in high-pressure professions, sharing his story not as a tale of victimhood, but as a lesson on the importance of emotional awareness. However, he also knew that the public's fascination with the incident would always haunt him, especially when it came up in media interviews. People want to know what happened that day, and for them it's a compelling story, Dr. Thompson reflected during one of his talks. But for me, it was just a moment of human failure, a moment I wish I could forget but can't. He felt conflicted. On one hand, the attention had given him a platform to talk about important issues, like the mental strain of high-stress jobs and the importance of maintaining respect in all professional environments. On the other, he never signed up to become the face of a viral moment that had been so far out of his control. Despite these lingering thoughts, Dr. Thompson's personal life, especially with his wife Vanessa, continued to flourish. The experience had brought them closer, and the support she had given him throughout the ordeal made him even more grateful for their relationship. They spent more time together, traveling when they could, and Dr. Thompson tried to focus on the things that brought him peace. Yet, there were moments when he would glance out the window during flights, his mind inevitably returning to the incident. It wasn't the physical act of the slap that stuck with him. It was the realization that, as a society, we often don't understand the pressures people are under, and how quickly things can escalate when we're not equipped to handle those pressures. For Sarah, the journey was far more complicated. Months after her firing, she was still wrestling with the emotional weight of the incident. The constant reminders, from memes to online forums, had left her feeling isolated. No matter where she turned, there was always someone or something reminding her of what she had done. Her social media, once a place for travel photos and lighthearted updates, had become a battleground where she faced public shaming daily. Though she had apologized repeatedly and expressed her regret, it never seemed to be enough for the people who had already passed judgment. Sarah's efforts to rebuild her life were slow and, at times, excruciating. She began to reach out to people she knew from her previous career, former colleagues and friends in the aviation industry, but it felt like everyone had turned their backs on her. Some were polite, but the truth was clear. They were uncomfortable around her, uncertain of how to treat someone who had become infamous. The hardest part wasn't the rejection, it was the fact that she felt she deserved it. Her actions had been indefensible, and she knew that. But over time, she came to understand that the shame she felt was not just about what had happened that day on the plane. It was about the person she had become in the aftermath of the incident. It wasn't until she started attending therapy that Sarah began to gain some clarity. At first, it felt like an impossible mountain to climb. Therapy wasn't just about confronting the slap. It was about confronting everything she had been avoiding. The stress, the isolation, the frustration, and the emotional pain she had buried deep inside. It was difficult to admit that she had let herself become a person who couldn't cope with her own emotions. Someone who had allowed years of pent-up stress to finally boil over in a moment of unchecked anger. But Sarah knew that if she was ever going to move forward, she had to confront these difficult truths. Over time, Sarah's therapy sessions helped her work through her emotions, and slowly, she began to feel the weight of her past actions lift. She knew it would take years to rebuild her life and career, but the first step toward healing was recognizing that she was responsible for what had happened, and that she could learn from it. She began volunteering at local charities, offering to help organize events, not as a way to redeem herself, but as a way to contribute positively to the community and to rebuild her own self-worth. It wasn't about public forgiveness. It was about personal redemption. Despite the emotional progress she was making, Sarah couldn't escape the reality that the aviation industry had moved on without her. She had been part of something she loved, traveling the world, meeting new people, and providing a sense of comfort to passengers. But now, her passion for the job had been tarnished by that one mistake. The job offers never came, and each rejection reinforced the harsh reality. The world wasn't as forgiving as she had hoped. One evening, as Sarah was sitting at her kitchen table, staring at an email rejection for yet another job she had applied for. She realized that perhaps her path forward wasn't in the skies, but somewhere else entirely. She had always loved helping people, and after spending months working through her emotions and learning new skills, she started to consider other avenues. Perhaps she could become a counselor, helping others who struggled with stress and emotional management, just as she had. Perhaps the lessons she had learned, the pain she had endured, could be used to guide others through their own moments of crisis. It was a daunting prospect, but Sarah began to see it as the only real way forward. She knew she couldn't undo what had happened, but she could reshape her future. It wasn't going to be easy, and it wasn't going to happen overnight, but it was a start. For both Dr. Thompson and Sarah, the road to healing was long and filled with obstacles, but both had taken steps toward growth, whether through advocating for mental health or trying to rebuild a life torn apart by a single impulsive action. The incident on that flight had changed them both forever, but in the end, it also taught them that healing wasn't about erasing the past. It was about understanding it, learning from it, and using those lessons to build a better future. For Sarah, the process of rebuilding her personal reputation felt like a never-ending struggle. The public shaming, the constant reminders of the slap, and the media's relentless focus on her mistake made it nearly impossible to regain any sense of normalcy. Yet through her therapy and personal growth, she began to shift her focus away from what the public thought of her and towards what she could do to change her own life. It wasn't an easy decision, but Sarah began to see the value in stepping away from the aviation industry. She realized that the airline world, the very industry that had given her so much, was also where her career had been irrevocably shattered. Trying to return to that world felt like chasing a dream that was no longer hers to have. Instead, she refocused on her personal healing. She took up courses in stress management, emotional intelligence, and conflict resolution, with the goal of eventually becoming a counselor or mentor to others in high-pressure environments. Although Sarah's journey had been painful, it gave her a unique perspective. She could now empathize with people who struggled under pressure, who faced overwhelming stress, or who, like her, felt the pressure of being in the public eye. She had lived through the darkness of public humiliation, and now she wanted to help others find their way through it. It wasn't about making up for her past. It was about ensuring that others didn't go down the same destructive path she had. While her dream of returning to her former career in aviation was fading, Sarah found a new passion for helping people navigate the challenges she had experienced firsthand. Her new path wasn't glamorous, and it wasn't the easy road. She knew the journey would take time, but the shift was therapeutic for her, focusing on making an impact in a different way. She began attending community meetings, volunteering at local organizations that helped people with mental health challenges, and offering support to those in need. Slowly, she found a sense of purpose again. Meanwhile, Dr. Thompson had come to terms with the public nature of the incident. He had learned that while his life had been deeply affected by the viral moment, he couldn't control how others saw him. The public perception would always be shaped by that one moment on the plane, but he had made peace with it. More importantly, he focused on the people who mattered to him, the colleagues, friends, and family who supported him through the ordeal. They were the ones who truly knew him, and that was what mattered. He continued to advocate for emotional well-being, particularly within high-stress professions. He worked with hospitals and medical groups, creating workshops that focused on stress management, emotional intelligence, and conflict resolution. He used his experience to inspire others to deal with conflict in a calm, respectful manner, and to seek help when they felt overwhelmed. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on Dr. Thompson. He had been a physician who had always taken the high road in difficult situations, but the slap had forced him to confront the ways in which stress could affect even the most composed of individuals. He found fulfillment in the idea that he could help others avoid the same pitfalls that had come so suddenly into his own life. His message was clear. Everyone has bad days, but it's how we respond to them that defines us. While both Dr. Thompson and Sarah struggled in their own ways, They came to realize that their experiences had opened their eyes to the need for deeper conversations around mental health, stress, and emotional management. In some strange way, the incident had made them more compassionate. Dr. Thompson toward others who experienced emotional stress in high-pressure environments, and Sarah toward those who felt the sting of public judgment. Both of them found peace, not through public approval, but through personal growth. Dr. Thompson's focus on advocating for emotional well-being helped him feel like he was using his experience to create positive change. Sarah's work in the community gave her a new sense of purpose, and though she could never undo the past, she began to find meaning in moving forward. For Dr. Thompson, the incident had cemented his belief in the importance of mental health awareness. He often spoke about how easy it was for people to overlook the emotional burdens that others were carrying. People go through things we can't always see, he often said in interviews. A simple gesture, a word, or a moment of stress can tip someone over the edge. He became an advocate for stress management in all professions, emphasizing that emotional well-being wasn't something to be overlooked. It wasn't just about doctors or flight attendants. It was about every worker, every person who interacted with others in high-stress situations. The ripple effect of emotional regulation could transform not just individuals, but entire industries. Dr. Thompson also used his platform to talk about empathy. He learned that responding to conflict with patience and understanding was far more effective than reacting impulsively. In a way, the incident had opened his eyes to the fact that he was not immune to human error, and that everyone, even the most composed, could have a breaking point. For him, the most valuable lesson was understanding that no one truly knows the full story of another person's life. Sarah had acted impulsively, but her actions were born out of a complex combination of stress, frustration, and perhaps even unaddressed mental health issues. Dr. Thompson's story was never just about a slap on a plane. It was about understanding human vulnerability and the need to cultivate environments where people could speak up about their struggles before they reached a breaking point. For Sarah, the journey toward personal redemption was more about understanding the full scope of her own humanity. She had spent years focusing on the external, her job, her career, her success. But the slap had forced her to look inward. It had made her realize that true growth could only happen when she faced the difficult, often painful truths about herself. She had learned to take responsibility for her actions, but more importantly, she had learned to forgive herself. "I'm still working on rebuilding my life," Sarah admitted during one of her interviews with a local community group. "But I've come to understand that forgiveness starts with yourself. I can't change the past, but I can build a future I can be proud of." Both Sarah and Dr. Thompson had come a long way since that fateful day on the plane. They had learned that the road to healing was not quick or easy, but with time, self-reflection, and a willingness to learn from their mistakes, they had found a way forward. The slap had changed everything for both of them, but it had also given them the opportunity to become better versions of themselves. In the end, both Dr. Thompson and Sarah understood that redemption wasn't about public approval or even the world's forgiveness. It was about living a life that reflected the lessons learned through hardship and using those lessons to make a positive difference in the world around them. They had both been through a fire, but now they stood stronger, wiser, kinder, and more aware of the complexities of human behavior and the importance of never underestimating the power of empathy. As time passed, the stories of both Dr. Thompson and Sarah had settled into quieter chapters. The media frenzy had long subsided, but the lessons they learned from the incident remained deeply embedded in their lives. In many ways, both had come full circle, understanding that the path to healing for themselves and others was paved not just with personal growth, but with compassion, understanding, and the willingness to embrace change. For Dr. Thompson, the journey toward healing had evolved into something far bigger than his own experience. Initially, when the slap had occurred, he had simply been focused on the immediate fallout, the shock, the embarrassment, and the physical sting. But over time, he realized that this was not just about him. It was about what the incident revealed on a larger scale. His personal experience became an opportunity to reflect on the pressures faced by so many individuals who worked in high-stress, customer-facing professions. He became a leading advocate for mental health awareness, particularly in fields like medicine, aviation, and service industries. Through workshops and public speaking, he emphasized how essential it was for individuals to learn emotional regulation and stress management. Dr. Thompson also found himself becoming a voice for those who felt voiceless in their struggles. Stress can take many forms, he often explained during interviews. But what we often forget is that emotional health is just as important as physical health. If we don't give it the attention it deserves, it can have disastrous consequences, not just for the person, but for the people they interact with. His work became centered around developing strategies for preventing emotional burnout, teaching people how to identify and manage their emotions before they spiraled into something more dangerous. He didn't shy away from using his own story as a teaching moment. In a way, his public identity had changed, and he had embraced it. He used his platform not only to share his journey of healing, but also to shed light on the importance of mental well-being in every profession. "We don't just need more resources for physical health," he said in one of his speeches at a national medical conference. "We need to treat emotional health with the same urgency, the same care, and the same investment." For Dr. Thompson, this advocacy work gave him a deeper sense of fulfillment than any patient's case could. It gave him a purpose that transcended the day-to-day responsibilities of being a doctor. As much as he had helped people physically, he now had the chance to contribute to their emotional recovery as well. The story of the slap, although painful, had ultimately opened the door to a more profound and meaningful form of service, one that touched not just individual lives, but entire communities. Meanwhile, Sarah's life continued its slow and painstaking recovery. But she had begun to realize that true redemption wasn't a quick fix, it was a process. In the months following the incident, Sarah had shifted her focus from seeking forgiveness from others to seeking forgiveness from herself. She had spent so much time punishing herself over the past, allowing her mistakes to define her, that she had nearly lost sight of the possibility for growth. Therapy had helped her rebuild her emotional foundation, but it was her work in the community that allowed her to start regaining her self-worth. She had initially thought that her redemption would come from external validation, that a new job, a new chance in the industry she loved would help her put the past behind her. But as time went on, she began to realize that the true healing came from within. By embracing her mistakes, by acknowledging the full scope of the hurt she had caused, and by making amends in the ways she could, Sarah started to build the foundation for a new life. Not one defined by the slap on the plane, but one shaped by her own growth and desire to help others. Sarah's new path wasn't the one she had expected, but it had become one that was uniquely hers. She had become involved in programs that focused on mental health and stress relief, speaking to others who had suffered from similar emotional breakdowns. While she still faced moments of doubt, her work with people struggling to manage their own emotional battles gave her a deep sense of purpose. "I know I can't change the past, and I can't undo what happened," she said in an interview with a local mental health podcast. "But I can help others who are going through what I went through, to teach them that there's always a way forward, no matter how hard it feels." Her work began to focus on those who felt like they had lost everything, people in crisis, people who had made mistakes or gone down paths they regretted. "We're all human," she would say in her workshops. "We all fail, we all fall, but it's how we rise up that counts." Slowly, her efforts began to resonate with others. Her passion for emotional healing, combined with her first-hand experience, gave her credibility. She became a trusted figure in her community, someone who could speak not just from theory, but from lived experience. As Sarah worked on rebuilding her own life, she began to find joy in helping others rebuild theirs. While she could never fully escape the consequences of her past actions, she had found a new purpose, one that didn't need to be defined by the viral moment that had once made her infamous. Instead, Sarah's purpose was now rooted in the idea of helping others navigate the complexities of their emotions, offering the kind of guidance and compassion that she had so desperately needed during her own dark days. Looking back, both Dr. Thompson and Sarah saw the incident from different lenses, yet both recognized that it had changed their lives in fundamental ways. For Dr. Thompson, it had been a painful reminder of human vulnerability, but it had also opened his eyes to the importance of emotional health, both in his profession and in society at large. For Sarah, it was a moment of reckoning, one that forced her to confront her own emotional turmoil, take responsibility for her actions, and eventually use those painful lessons to help others. In the end, their stories were not just about the slap on the plane. They were about the power of empathy, the importance of emotional intelligence, and the potential for growth even after the most humiliating, life-altering moments. Both of them had learned that redemption wasn't about erasing the past, but about using it as a stepping stone to a more compassionate, meaningful future. As they moved forward in their respective journeys, they both understood that healing, in its truest sense, wasn't something that happened overnight. It was a slow, sometimes painful process that required vulnerability, self-compassion, and a willingness to face the truth of one's actions. But it was also a process that, if embraced fully, could lead to greater strength, greater understanding, and ultimately, a greater sense of peace. For both Dr. Thompson and Sarah, that peace was the true reward of their journey, a reward that no viral moment, no matter how shocking, could ever take away. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to give it a thumbs up, share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more videos like this.